It is Friday, December 3rd. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone. We have two pretty noteworthy anniversaries happening today. The first one being the original PlayStation launching in Japan, December 3rd, 1994, and also Jak and Daxter launching December 3rd, 2001. Had to bring that up, couldn't just walk right past that, especially for PS1, where, we wouldn't be here without the original PlayStation launching all those years back then. Now with that, let's start off as always with our PS Plus reminder. Make sure you grab the November games before they go away. December 7th, it's going to change over to LEGO DC Supervillains, Mortal Shell, and also as we were expecting Godfall, so the leaks were almost right because it's not quite Godfall, it's Godfall Challenger Edition, and that's where this newly announced version was something we didn't see coming. It's basically the post-game content. So they took out the story mode, and you're walking in with a fully leveled character, jumping right into all the big challenges and enemies and bosses, and you're getting all the upgrades, I think, right away. Just everything in the post-game, that's what you're walking into right away. No story mode, which if you download this version of the game, then you have an option to buy the story content after. So this is something where I think immediately the gut reaction is like, okay, really? Like, that's super lame, which is justifiable. I think the thought process here was, let's maybe skip the part where a lot of players fell off from the game, right? Because that's even what I discussed last week. That was my experience with the game, and I know it was the experience for many of you on launch, where again, it's a quintessential launch game. Maybe you bought it just because, and after a few hours it's like, all right, I'm not going to play this anymore. You drop it for something else, and maybe that's what it was, right? Where a lot of players got hung up was the story, and you just don't care. But so perhaps that's what the thought process was behind the Challenger Edition, which maybe that's where it's going to work out better for people trying it for the first time. My thought was also isn't the game kind of like a pain or difficult building up to the end game content? That's the entire point, right? So this might not be that friendly to new players. So I don't know. Depending on how you take it, that's where it might be a good thing, but maybe not. Also worth mentioning that the Challenger Edition will be free on Epic Game Store as well, so you don't necessarily have to be a Plus subscriber to download this. So that's just another reason to look at this and go, well, that's kind of lame. So if anything, I say try Mortal Shell when that drops on PS Plus December 7th. Anyway, moving on to our first story, PS5 System Software Update 2102.04.50 just recently came out. This one is your typical system performance improvement, stability, whatever they're saying nowadays, which this probably acknowledges whatever sort of loophole or vulnerability was in the last firmware, where that one was cracked by the flow and fail overflow, which, remember, that doesn't necessarily mean they've been able to run unsigned code on PS5, just that particular firmware, they've opened it, now they can start looking for more vulnerabilities. So in all likelihood, this one cleans up whatever was wrong with that previous release, and we may start seeing more firmware updates just to acknowledge any sort of ongoing problems or vulnerabilities that those groups and many others start finding in these PS5 official releases. And we also actually have PS4 firmware update 9.03, and this is where I'm a bit curious as to what firmware version PS4 will end on, so maybe we can start humoring that conversation. We're at 9.03. Who knows how long PS4 really has? I would guess probably at a minimum 2 years, right? Because actually the company's still pretty committed to doing not major features for PS4, although you'd certainly like to see that stuff still come for another year and a half or 2 years, but probably the parental control features. So anything that PS5 gets in that regard, the company's been pretty consistent with updating PS4 for at least the parental control features, so that would be great to have. It's also, we should still be seeing Discord functionality at some point, which I would imagine is a firmware update, or at least that would imply that it's more tightly integrated into the PS4 and PS5 system software, or perhaps it'll be a separate application that you can launch and it can just be something that runs in the background, so it might not be tied directly to the firmware. Remains to be seen what that's going to look like when it drops, but we should be seeing that relatively soon. For our next news story, Gematsu recently ran a report on the developer WFS, where they're teasing a collaboration with Square Enix on another Eden. a cat beyond time and space, and it's going to be a Chrono Cross collaboration in all likelihood, which that live stream will take place on December 4th. And in this report about this particular thing, Gamatsu had one little line in there that said, Gamatsu has heard about a Chrono Cross remaster as well. So a very small little thing that can easily get overlooked, but it's a small update in this ongoing rumor, so for those wanting more validity or sources, there's one of them. Gamatsu doesn't really often put up any sort of rumory reports, or they don't usually run with a story like that or make claims unless they have good sources. So oftentimes when they do, it's pretty consistent. And we should be seeing whatever this is very soon. They're calling it a remaster. We've heard before it's a remake, so once we see what it looks like, we'll get a much better idea of if it is a full-blown remake or if it's, you know, not really, they didn't dress it up too nice and it's just a port to modern consoles. Next up, there was a recent update to the YouTube app on PS5 that you might not have noticed. It now supports HDR, so if you're using YouTube regularly on PS5, then you should now be able to watch HDR content, which isn't really all too common on YouTube nowadays. I tried to actually experiment with it a little bit, and it is not easy to work with whatsoever, just because of the displays that you need to edit on to make sure that it looks correct, the color profile of it, and then the file size for anything HDR is massive. So it's kind of a huge barrier of entry for a lot of creators, but some other high production stuff can certainly do HDR on YouTube. It's been around for a little bit, and so if you're using YouTube on PS5, you can now actually watch HDR capable videos. Also, while we're talking about applications, we can also say that the BBC iPlayer app is finally available on PS5 if you're in the UK, which I'm surprised that this was not available months ago. So that's finally here as well. BBC iPlayer, not something applicable to the United States right now, but BBC content, finally, that is watchable on PS5. Sign in, make a new account, and you're all good there. Moving on to Media Molecule's Dreams. This game recently saw a pretty big update, version 2.35, and in it includes that game they announced 1 or 2 months back called Ancient Dangers: A Bat's Tale. That's the hack and slash single-player co-op game, like a dungeon crawler, which that looks really cool. It's Media Molecule's biggest game they've made so far in Dreams, so that's now available. And probably more importantly, there was an update to the dreamscaping mechanic or mode. That's just where you make your own levels, and within there, you know, normally when you start the game or when you try to make your own level, it's a blank canvas. You're just in this room and you have all these tutorials, and it's kind of, well, it's not really user-friendly or easy to get into, right? Like, I love Little Big Planet, and I used to spend hundreds of hours making LBP levels. But I found Dreams to be a lot more difficult. So with this recent update, what they've done is they've included a bunch of templates for different genres, right? Because that's the crazy thing about Dreams, is that you don't have to be stuck to this LBP 2D platformer-esque situation. You can make pretty much anything. So there's templates in there now for a 2D platformer, a 3D platformer, arcade-style games, I think mini golf, there's a few of them in there, right? But there's a lot of starting points where it's a reference point, right? So there's a world that's actually built for you, or, you know, certain systems and landscapes are just placed there for you right away, and that's where you can start building on top of those things, which might make it a lot more simple. Now, it's been a while since I played, so I'm sure there's a lot of updates that have made it a bit more friendly as time pressed forward. So I really got to go back and try it for myself, because that was probably the most disappointing thing for me, was I couldn't really make much of anything within Dreams, and that's probably the case for a lot of people. And it's a shame, actually, that Dreams is something where it's easily cast to the side unless we have major news like this, because every day I'm seeing so many major updates going on within Dreams when it comes to the community and all the crazy levels that they're making. And it's very much full-scale development for a lot of these people, where you've got multiple folks working on one level or one full-scale game that, you know, it's not going to happen over a 2-3 month period. It's going to take much longer, but we're seeing some levels that are just so insane, and I got to get back into it. I really do, and maybe this is one where I'll try and squeeze a few hours in and see what's going on. Next up, much like we've covered for Uncharted being rated in Australia and North America, we now also have news that Horizon Forbidden West was rated in Australia as well, and that is fantastic because that tells us that the game is probably going to release on time. So again, it means that, well, games aren't rated unless they're going to be releasing within a relatively short window, so unless there's like maybe a few week or month delay or something, that would be like a worst case scenario, but it seems like the game's probably going to release on time, and that's definitely what we want to hear. So well, especially because with Horizon, I mean, you kind of expect that Guerrilla will probably do this, but once they've gone gold, they are absolutely going to send that infamous tweet where they announce they've gone gold, and that's when we'll know for sure that, yes, the game is going to release in February like it's supposed to. And it's coming up quick. Time is going by a lot faster than you think. At least it feels like that for me, so it was a dry holiday season when it comes to PlayStation first party, but Horizon and Gran Turismo are right around the corner. Now, in what is a very expected piece of news, but still something where, when it comes up, it's not great, the servers are being closed for 3 PlayStation Vita games. So, Freedom Wars, Soul Sacrifice, and Soul Sacrifice Delta, which is principally similar to Soul Sacrifice, but all 3 of those, December 24th, the servers are officially donezo, which these were 2 games that we always checked in on in our yearly PS Vita Online video, which we do alongside the PS3 one. Most of you probably watched the PS3 one, but Vita was still going. Still a lot of Vita games in there, but now we've lost a lot this year. We lost those, or we're going to lose those, and then we also lost Little Big Planet PS Vita as well. That one still stings because it was supposed to come back, or at least they were trying to, and then that's when they just said, yeah, LBP 1, 2, and Vita is going to be staying shut down, but LBP 3 and all those levels are still retained, which was good news, but you can't get mad when this happens. It's an inevitability, so I know it really bums a lot of people out, but it is going to happen at some point. But that's why we had our Tuesday video, right, where we looked at PS1's reverse engineering efforts, where they're bringing back a lot of PS3 games, and I believe they also want to do PlayStation Vita stuff as well, which I must not have made this entirely clear during the video, but there are other groups doing this, right? Especially because some people aren't totally on board with PS1's private servers being, or all that source code being private, which is totally fine. It's on you, depending on if you want to or not play on their servers, but there's other groups that are actually doing this as well, right? So it's not just PS1. The work they're doing is very important, but there's actually a large community effort even outside of their group that are bringing a lot of these games back online. Soul Sacrifice, Freedom Wars, LBP Vita, a lot of these games are still going to have their own life beyond their official server closures. It's going to be a bit more complicated having to do it now, depending on how a group actually brings a game back online, right? Because at that point, there's a lot of work on their end to bring their own server up and making it, or putting it into a playable state if they're not doing something like Excellent Kai, which is also a very real possibility for any community members that want to keep playing these games. So I don't know if this is a matter of it being more of a slower news week where there was a little bit of discussion going on around this, but it piqued my interest, so let's talk about it, which is Housemarque's Twitter account recently sending out this cryptic tweet where it says Atropos, ? And it puts a screenshot of what I'm guessing may or may not be new content, right? That's the theory or the question here, because a lot of people in the replies were, or at least hoping that maybe it's DLC for Returnal, and there's going to be some bias there just because they're people following Housemarque's account to begin with, so of course they want some Returnal DLC or some form of new content, but maybe that's what it is. I mean, I would be not surprised at all if we actually do get some kind of separate piece of, well, free would certainly be nice, but I would imagine paid content, which is maybe $10, $15, which nowadays doesn't really seem all that common. Just the model of releasing paid single-player content, it seems like it's far and few between nowadays, but Housemarque has done that for a lot of their games, so it would definitely be in their DNA, I guess, to do that in terms of post-launch content. So it could be like 1 or 2 other biomes, a new boss. I think that would be actually really great, especially when you look at Housemarque's current job listings. Unsurprisingly, they are working on a new game. I mean, they're a developer where they could have the majority of the staff working on that new project, or at least gearing up for it, right? Because they did just ship Returnal, but have a few other folks behind working on some post-game content. And, well, what we saw recently was like the fix for being able to save mid-run. So If I had to guess, I'd say that's what Housemarque's doing right now. The majority of staff are doing the new stuff, whereas you've still got a few folks behind working on Returnal right now when it comes to just general quality of life fixes, patches, but also potentially new content, which I would like to see, and maybe that's just me being selfish, but that's what I would like to have. Next up, this one is more of a reminder than anything else, but this past week you probably saw the blowout of Bioshock related rumors and teases from that Oops Leak Twitter account, where it put out that logo called Bioshock Isolation, where they're alleging that it will have a reveal during Q1 2022. They also put out a lot of info regarding the narrative and story beats, and whether that is or is not true. The reminder here is that we do have a rumor about Sony potentially securing some sort of exclusivity agreement with that game. And that was from Xbox era co-founder Special Nick, where he's put out a lot of things throughout the past year. So with what he's been saying and then everything else regarding PlayStation 5 rumors, just as a reminder, we're keeping our eyes on all these things, right? So this is one where we're finally seeing some movement in the Bioshock area. This game should have a reveal sometime next year, whether this rumor is or is not true. But when it does have a formal reveal, that's where we'll get our answer pretty much right away, because if Sony has secured some sort of agreement, and let's say it is timed exclusivity, then it would probably be announced on their terms, I would guess. That's why, as an example, we saw Deathloop for all of 2020 and 2021 from the PlayStation blog and any sort of Sony live stream, right? That's why that happened. And Sony doesn't always pursue third-party deals that are that aggressive, but PS5 has been a bit different, so maybe they will do it. I don't know. I'm not expecting it for Bioshock. I would actually be quite surprised, but if they do it, that's how it would happen. The second this game is announced, we'll know right away what platforms, where, and if Sony's involved, I'm sure that'll cause quite a frenzy, but we'll keep our eyes on it. Moving on to our next story, we've got a pretty big update here when it comes to one of the biggest problems many people have been facing for the last year and a half, 2 years, or going on 2 years, which is trying to buy any sort of high-profile product online. Bots getting in the way, people buying them in bulk and then selling them back on eBay, Overstock, Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, that whole ordeal. So this past week, a bill was reintroduced by Democratic lawmakers to stop this, or at least try to enforce those acts, which the bill is called the Stopping Grinch Bots Act, which is kind of comical, but that is the name of the bill, and it is being reintroduced. So they tried to do this back in November 2019, which it didn't go through or didn't pan out, so they're trying to do it now, especially because the last year and a half has been so stir-crazy with how products get sold out right away, and there is a kind of a disgusting aftermarket, of course, where they're being sold much more than what they MSRP for normally. So if this bill were to go through, what it would do is prohibit manipulative technical practices that would be using bots to circumvent controlled measures designed to protect real consumers, make it an illegal FTC violation to circumvent those measures, make it illegal to sell the products obtained by this method, and allow the FTC and state attorneys to treat these acts as unfair, deceptive, and have legal action taken against the offenders. So that's in essence what this would do if it goes through, and there's a decent amount of support behind the bill, and if it were to go through, who would be responsible for enforcing it is the FTC themselves, and that's the big problem with this, right, is how do you really enforce this? How do you have some sort of success rate out of it to begin with, because there's a lot of questions left up in the air about how do you enforce it, what do you do for somebody that's international, are they caught, or how do you catch them? There's too many unknowns, or it's just too muddy, and that's kind of what we were getting at back when this was when we had a lot of stories about it, the first quarter of this year, 2021, right? Remember when we had some stories about how certain groups were trying to act like they were doing a service to people, and then they played the sob story of like, we lost our jobs during the pandemic, so we spent 20 grand buying consoles to sell them for 30, things like that, right? When we had those stories, that was like a question that many of us posed, like, all right, but even if there is legislation in place, what does that really do? Because you have to actually enforce it in the first place, and it's not going to be nearly as easy to catch somebody and then prove it. You could maybe get one person, throw the book at him, make an example, and that could maybe lead more people to stop doing it. Or you just go the other route of like, all right, well, certain sites need to kind of get their stuff together here, and create better anti-bot checkout processes. Also, manufacturers can just help this by basing it off of customer interest, existing accounts, the age of the account, or just taking open orders. So there's a bunch of pre-order waves, I guess, based on manufacturing of that product, right? There's a lot of ways where they can, or I guess more meaningful measures, right? Because the other aspect of this, and it's still the thing that people are really overlooking about the entire process. I know it's frustrating to buy a PS5 or a Series X, but you have to remember you're fighting other humans. You're fighting regular customers. We've got plenty of data that shows there's, you know, the vast majority of consoles still get sold to regular people, right? So whether there are measures to stop bots or not, you're still gonna, I mean, if the product's high profile enough, if the manufacturer didn't make enough, it's going to go immediately, whether there's bots there or not. Certain sites definitely get hit harder than others. It would obviously be very helpful to remove them out of the equation, but just letting people know, it's still overlooked that you're fighting other humans in this process as well. So it's an interesting bill, but if it's passed, I'd really like to see them actually enforce it somehow and see what that really looks like. I don't have much confidence, but we'll see. Next up, we have yet another patent filed by Sony Interactive Entertainment back in May and recently published November 25th. And this one, the title of it is quite long. It says Operation System, Information Processing System, Operation Information Generation Method, and Operation Information Generation Program. What does that mean? Well, the pictures at least show us that it's some sort of little device where it's it looks like a DualShock 4, but it's essentially a mobile phone controller where it's kind of like the Backbone or the Razer Kishi. So not quite a mobile phone clip mount or whatever for an existing controller, like you can buy those for $10-15 on Amazon. This would be more of a tailored peripheral for the mobile phone where it's in a horizontal orientation and you play it that way. Which it may not look exactly like a DualShock 4 cut in half. It could just be a crude representation and the final product design is far away if it does actually get released as a consumer-facing product, but it wouldn't be surprising if they did this. I know many of you probably don't care whatsoever because it's an accessory for mobile phones, but we have to remember that Sony has a PlayStation mobile division that was formed recently, and they just appointed Nicola Sebastiani from Apple Arcade, so it seems like they're putting a good amount of resources and energy into this, which admittedly I would like to see. I don't care for mobile games myself, but my biggest problem with PlayStation over the years is when they venture into these other sectors and product categories or adapting PlayStation IP out of the traditional console model, it's almost always a very half-hearted attempt. So like PlayStation Productions, as an example, maybe you don't care for it right now, but let me tell you, this is the most they've really put into adapting PlayStation IP into TV and film. They're really doing it well, or at least they're trying. And I would like to see that same effort for the mobile games as well. So if this little device is real, they could coincide that with these games that they're planning on doing at some point. I don't even know when we're supposed to be expecting these things to get revealed or how many are really in development. There's not really too much news surrounding what the mobile division is really going to put out. Or it could just be a simple accessory for remote play or just being able to use a PlayStation certified product for existing mobile games that are just, regular mobile games, right? They don't have to be Sony's. So maybe they're just doing that as well. Either way, I wouldn't be surprised if Sony does put out something like this in the short-term future. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. Follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I want to talk about with you all from this past week. Our Tuesday video was PS3 games being back online, so like I mentioned earlier, I actually reached out to the PS1 group and talked to one of the co-founders. He provided some insight into what's actually going on behind the scenes to bring those games back online. I also played Motorstorm and Killzone 2 that weekend, so that was a lot of fun. Go check out that gameplay and interview. And then coming up, we've got the Game Awards, which I know a lot of people are really excited, and like I said, I love Jeff Keighley, I do, but he will always really oversell his shows, so keep that in mind. I think there's a lot of expectations, and at least I would warn personally, maybe lower them a bit. That way you don't watch it, get upset, and go, oh, it sucked again this year. But that's at least how I'm walking into this thing, so hopefully it's going to be a very good show. But that's it. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.